August 17th, 1943. Over the skies of Regensburg, Germany, Luftwaffe pilot Wilhelm Jonen lined up his Messerschmitt Bf 109 behind an American bomber. He fired. Direct hits. He saw the tracers strike the fuselage, the wing. Pieces of metal flew off. The bomber kept flying. He made another pass. More hits. Smoke now. Visible damage. Still flying. On his third attack, he emptied his ammunition into the aircraft. He watched sections of the tail disintegrate. He saw an engine catch fire. The bomber maintained formation and continued toward its target. When Jonen landed, he wrote in his combat report, "I do not understand how this aircraft remains airborne. By all logic, it should have fallen from the sky." He was describing the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. And he wasn't alone in his confusion. When the B-17 first appeared over Europe in 1942, German fighter pilots and ground commanders had certain expectations. They'd fought British bombers. They knew what bombers did when you hit them. They fell. Or they turned back. Or they broke formation seeking safety. The B-17 did none of these things. The first large-scale American bombing raid came on August 17, 1942, exactly 1 year before Jonen's encounter. 12 B-17s attacked the railroad marshalling yards at Rouen-Sotteville in France. German fighters engaged them. The engagement reports from Luftwaffe pilots show a pattern of confusion. Heavy defensive fire from all angles. Aircraft continues despite visible damage. Tight formation maintained under attack. The bombers completed their mission. All 12 returned to base. This was not what the Germans expected. General Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most experienced fighter commanders, reviewed the combat reports. His assessment was blunt. The Americans have introduced a bomber that changes the equation of air warfare. He was right. But even he didn't fully understand how much it would change. The B-17 Flying Fortress wasn't the biggest bomber. It wasn't the fastest. It didn't carry the most bombs. What it did was survive. 3 things made it exceptional. First, its defensive armament. The B-17G model carried 13 .50 caliber machine guns. 13. Positioned to cover virtually every angle of approach. German fighters were used to attacking bombers from behind and below. The traditional blind spot. The B-17 had guns there. They approached from the side. Guns there, too. From above. More guns. A Luftwaffe pilot named Hans Eckehard. Bob described it. Approaching a formation of fortresses was like flying into a wall of fire. You could see the tracers coming at you from multiple aircraft simultaneously. It was unlike anything we'd encountered. Second, its structure. The B-17 was built with redundancy that German engineers found excessive until they saw it in action. It had 4 engines. Lose 1, it kept flying. Lose 2, it still made it home. If the pilot was skilled and lucky. Its control surfaces were reinforced. You could shoot away portions of the tail, and the aircraft remained controllable. Its fuel tanks were self-sealing. A hit that would ignite a German bomber's fuel system would merely damage a B-17's tank, which would then seal itself. And its airframe, the basic structure, was over-engineered by European standards. It could absorb damage that would tear apart other aircraft. Third, and perhaps most important, was how the Americans used it. The B-17s flew in tight formation. Not loose, defensive spreads like European bombers. Tight. Overlapping fields of defensive fire. A German fighter attacking one B-17 was being fired upon by 6 or 7 others simultaneously. Luftwaffe tactical doctrine had to be completely rewritten. Initially, German commanders believed the problem was tactical. Their pilots were attacking wrong, using insufficient firepower, not pressing attacks home. So they adapted. They tried head-on attacks, diving at the formation from above and ahead, where the B-17's nose guns were weakest in early models. This worked better, but it required flying directly into the combined fire of an entire formation at closing speeds over 500 miles per hour. The window to aim and fire was seconds, maybe less. Pilots who survived these attacks described it as suicidal. They tried heavier weapons. The standard 20mm cannon was replaced with 30mm, then 37mm. Some fighters were equipped with rockets, unguided projectiles designed to break up formations. The rockets worked occasionally, but firing an unguided rocket at a target while being shot at by 13 machine guns required either exceptional skill or exceptional desperation. By 1943, some German fighters were equipped with 50mm cannons, the same caliber used by anti-tank guns. The recoil from firing these weapons nearly stalled the aircraft. A Luftwaffe report from late 1943 noted, "Even when our attacks succeed in destroying 1 or 2 bombers, the formation continues. The Americans do not turn back. We shoot down bombers, but the bombs still fall." This was the part that shocked German commanders most. Not that the B-17 was tough, though it was, but that the Americans kept coming. By 1943, the strategic situation became clear to German high command. Every B-17 raid required dozens of German fighters to intercept. Those fighters burned fuel, they expended ammunition, and crucially, they risked pilots. Germany could build fighters faster than they could train pilots. The Americans, meanwhile, were producing B-17s at a rate the Germans found incomprehensible. In 1943 alone, Boeing and its partners built over 4,400 B-17s. 4,400. Even when German fighters shot down significant numbers, and they did, more B-17s appeared. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, reportedly told his pilots, "When you see American bombers escorted by fighters painted in yellow, then you'll know the war is lost." He was referring to the P-51 Mustang, which would eventually escort the B-17s all the way to their targets and back. But even before the long-range escorts arrived, the B-17 was bleeding the Luftwaffe, not because it was shooting down massive numbers of German fighters, though it did account for many, but because defending against it required Germany to commit resources it couldn't spare. Fuel, ammunition, pilots, time. It's important to understand. The B-17 wasn't invincible. Far from it. Of the roughly 12,700 B-17s built, nearly 5,000 were lost in combat. Thousands more were damaged beyond repair. The casualty rate for B-17 crews was staggering. In some periods, the odds of a crewman surviving a full tour of 25 missions were less than 1 in 4. When a B-17 went down, 10 men went with it. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, flight engineer, radio operator, and 4 gunners. Some survived. Many didn't. German fighter pilots, too, paid a terrible price. The defensive firepower of a B-17 formation was lethal. Many Luftwaffe aces, pilots with dozens of victories, died attacking American bomber formations. The shock German commanders felt wasn't admiration. It was recognition of a problem they couldn't solve. Every formation of B-17 represented a choice: engage and suffer losses, or allow them through and suffer bombing. There was no good option. German military records from 1943-1944 show a consistent theme. Combat reports describe B-17s returning to base with catastrophic damage. One wing mostly gone, tail section shredded, entire sections of fuselage missing. One famous case, a B-17 named All-American collided with a German fighter. The impact nearly severed the fuselage. The tail section was hanging on by a few structural members and control cables. The pilot, Lieutenant Kendrick Bragg, kept the aircraft flying and landed it successfully. The Germans had photographs of this. It was studied by Luftwaffe intelligence. Their conclusion: American engineering had created something that exceeded what they believed possible. General Galland wrote in his memoirs after the war, "We developed countermeasures, improved our tactics, increased our firepower. But the fundamental problem remained. The B-17 was designed to absorb punishment, and it did exactly that." He also noted something else. The Americans were willing to accept losses we found incomprehensible. They sent their bombers knowing many would not return. And they kept sending them. The B-17 didn't win the war alone. No single weapon does. But it forced Germany to make choices that weakened it elsewhere. Thousands of aircraft and pilots were tied up in home defense. Aircraft and pilots that couldn't be used on the Eastern Front or in the Mediterranean. Industrial capacity was diverted to fighter production instead of bombers, tanks, or other weapons. Anti-aircraft guns that could have been used against Soviet tanks were instead positioned around German cities. And the bombing itself, while debated in terms of strategic effectiveness, undeniably disrupted German war production. The shock wasn't just about the B-17 as a machine. It was about what the B-17 represented: industrial capacity, technological sophistication, and operational doctrine that Germany couldn't match. When German commanders saw formations of hundreds of B-17s, protected by fighters, operating in daylight, striking with precision, they understood they were facing an enemy with resources they couldn't compete against. After the war, German engineers studied captured B-17s. What they found was a different philosophy of aircraft design. German bombers were efficient, streamlined. They used the minimum materials necessary to accomplish the mission. The B-17 was the opposite. It was heavy, overbuilt. It used more aluminum, more rivets, more structural members than German engineers thought necessary. Until they understood, it wasn't overbuilt. It was built to come home. Every redundant system, every extra structural beam, every self-sealing fuel tank was designed with one purpose: keep the crew alive and get them back to base. German doctrine assumed losses. Aircraft were expendable. Pilots were valuable, but aircraft could be replaced. American doctrine, embodied in the B-17, took a different approach. Build the aircraft tough enough that the crew survives. Because training a crew takes longer than building an aircraft. It was a difference in philosophy that had profound consequences. The B-17 flew its last combat mission in Europe on April 25, 1945. By then, it had dropped more than 640,000 tons of bombs on European targets. More importantly, it had accomplished what it was designed to do. It penetrated defended airspace, delivered its payload, and brought its crews home. Not always. Not every mission, but more often than German commanders thought possible. After the war, Luftwaffe veterans were asked about the weapons they faced that surprised them most. Many mentioned the B-17, not because it was invincible. It wasn't. But because it kept coming. Mission after mission. Day after day. And because it survived damage that, by their understanding of engineering and aerodynamics, should have destroyed it. The B-17 Flying Fortress represents something that goes far beyond its technical specifications, beyond the aluminum and rivets and engines that made up its physical form. It represents a moment in history when technology, industrial capacity, and strategic doctrine converged to create something that fundamentally changed the nature of warfare. Not through a single innovation, but through the combination of many factors working together in ways that had never been seen before. The shock that German commanders felt wasn't simply about the aircraft itself, though the aircraft was indeed remarkable. It was about recognizing, slowly and with growing unease, that they were fighting an enemy that could produce such aircraft by the thousands, an enemy with industrial capacity so vast It seemed almost incomprehensible from the German perspective. They were facing a nation that could absorb terrible losses, losses that would have crippled any European power, and simply continue. That could put 10-man crews into the sky, knowing full well that many of them wouldn't return, and then keep doing it day after day, week after week, month after month, without pause, without wavering, without any sign of stopping. This was perhaps the most psychologically devastating aspect of facing the B-17 formations. It wasn't just that they were difficult to shoot down. It was that even when you did shoot them down, more appeared. Always more. The stream never ended. The B-17 didn't win the war through any single dramatic action or decisive battle. There was no one moment where the B-17 turned the tide. Instead, it won through accumulation. Through the slow, grinding, relentless pressure of persistence. Through simply being there, over the target, mission after mission, day after day. Through all weather, through all opposition, until there were no more targets left to strike. The Germans adapted to this threat. They fought brilliantly, often heroically, against overwhelming odds. Their pilots showed extraordinary courage, attacking formations that bristled with defensive firepower. Their engineers designed new weapons, new tactics, new strategies to counter the threat. Their commanders reorganized entire defensive networks around the problem the B-17 presented. But they couldn't solve the fundamental equation the B-17 presented. And they knew it. By 1944, many German commanders privately understood the arithmetic was against them. The equation was brutally simple, mathematically undeniable. America could build B-17s faster than Germany could shoot them down. Germany could destroy dozens of bombers in a single day and still face more the next day. The shock they felt in those early encounters slowly turned to recognition. Recognition of what they were truly facing. Not just a good bomber, but the manifestation of an industrial and economic power they had no answer for. The recognition, in turn, gradually turned to resignation. Not surrender. The fighting continued with ferocity until the very end, but resignation to the inevitable mathematics of attrition, to the knowledge that every day they survived was simply postponing what was now clearly inevitable. And the war continued, grinding forward relentlessly until there was literally nothing left to defend. Until the factories were rubble, the cities were ruins, and the fuel tanks were empty. The B-17 Flying Fortress earned its name not through invincibility. It was never invincible. Thousands were shot down. Tens of thousands of crewmen died. It could be destroyed, and it was destroyed, regularly, and in significant numbers. But it earned its name through stubborn, persistent, almost defiant survivability in the face of everything that was thrown against it, through its ability to absorb punishment that would destroy other aircraft and keep flying, through its capacity to bring its crews home even when, by all logic and engineering principles, it should have fallen from the sky. That's what truly shocked the German commanders. Not that the B-17 couldn't be destroyed. They destroyed many. Not that it was impossible to stop. They stopped individual aircraft regularly. But that despite all their efforts, despite all their skill and courage and innovation, it was so very, very hard to stop. And that no matter how many they stopped, more kept coming. That realization, that slow, creeping understanding of what they were truly facing, was perhaps more devastating than any single weapon could ever be. Today, fewer than a dozen B-17s remain airworthy. They fly at air shows, carrying passengers who want to experience a piece of history. The sound of 4 radial engines is unmistakable to those who know it. The men who flew them are nearly all gone now. The last combat veterans are in their 90s, their hundreds. Soon, there will be no one left who remembers what it was like to climb into that aircraft, knowing the odds, knowing the statistics, and going anyway. But the impact remains. Modern military aircraft, bombers, transports, even fighters, are built with the lessons learned from the B-17: redundancy, survivability, crew protection. These aren't just features, they're doctrine. The B-17 proved that an aircraft could be a weapon system designed not just to attack, but to return. That crew survivability wasn't a luxury, it was a strategic necessity. And perhaps that's the real legacy. Not the bombs it dropped or the targets it destroyed, but the idea that bringing people home mattered as much as completing the mission. That was revolutionary in 1942. It remains the standard today.